He was the greatest Finnish composer since Jean Sibelius. I'm the classical nerd, and today we're talking about Einojuhani Rautavaara. Rautavaara went into music via the piano at the age of 17, and this doubtless manifested itself in a piano technique he referred to himself as idiosyncratic. His mother was a doctor, and his father an operatic bass, but they both passed away before the age of 16, and his interest in composition was through reading biographies of modern composers. He came to attention in 1953 with his piece A Requiem for Our Time, which caught the attention of Jean Sibelius, who, even though he had written a new work in decades, was still a large, imposing force in Finnish musical life. Sibelius and Rautavaara became friends, and he sent the youngster off to study at Juilliard. In America, he met and took lessons with Aaron Copland, Vincent Persichetti, and Roger Sessions, who introduced him to modern compositional techniques such as serialism. And serialism wormed its way into his music, although his music always retained a personal style that was all his own. And while he remains the only Finnish composer ever to write a totally serial symphony, he quickly abandoned this style, as he'd only taken it up because, in his younger and more vulnerable years, he felt it necessary to follow along the path that everyone else was on. His most famous piece probably remains Cantus Arcticus, a concerto for taped bird song and orchestral accompaniment written on commission in 1972 from the University of Oulu. His seventh symphony, entitled Angel of Light, is one of his many works that have angels as part of their title. Personally, I love his wonderfully distinctive and idiosyncratic piano concerti, but that's just me. His style changed and evolved much over the course of his long career. If a composer writes exactly the same thing now as he did when he was 20 years old, then I think he is infantile, isn't he? Rautavaara said. Something happens with a man in his life, and that must influence his creation, his writing. His mature style was one of avowed synthesis between the neotonal and the modern. And speaking of his angel-inspired works, they're not exactly what one might assume given the titles. For one thing, Rautavaara was not a religious person, but he was spiritual, and he was very much drawn to religious imagery, specifically that of Eastern Orthodoxy. He saw music as an aspect of feeling infinity. Works with angel-related titles include Angels and Visitations, Monologue with Angels, Angel of Dusk, Playgrounds for Angels, and of course the aforementioned Angel of Light. The imagery was derived from poetry that doesn't depict angels as they appear in modern culture, but rather in a more strict biblical sense as these absolutely terrifying creatures. He saw his role in the production of his works as more midwife than mother. To Rautavaara, there was an aspect in composition that went beyond rational control, and he was always quick to encourage his students to take the music where the music wanted to go, not by force-fitting it into some kind of style. Likewise, the titles that he gave his works often became mantras for their composition, and indeed predated all of the music. For him, the sheer act of composition was enough. While he still obviously enjoyed performances, he did not see them as absolute necessities. In fact, he said that if he were imprisoned with absolutely no chance of ever hearing another piece of his performed in his life, he would still write music, because that's what he was. That was an immutable part of his being. Rautavaara's large orchestral works are known for their distinctive sound, with large stretches of beautiful melody atop thick harmonies that move in beautiful but entirely unexpected directions. His music retained a distinctive modernity that at the same time did not alienate audiences. His productivity manifested itself in 8 symphonies, 14 concertos, 9 operas, 2 piano sonatas, all atop a massive amount of choral works. He suffered an aortic dissection that nearly killed him in 2004, and he attributed his survival to the works he needed to write and the commissions he needed to fulfill. His death in July of 2016 came after complications with hip surgery, and he died at the age of 87. It is my belief that music is great if at some moment the listener catches a glimpse of eternity through the window of time, Rautavaara said. All else is of secondary importance.